Looks like we're all tethered. Fantastic. Everyone go ahead and stop your ships. Oh, it arrivers. Alright, so your cap booster should have probably just finished cycling through and it started reloading. Now here's another important thing. Your cap booster can only pull capsticks out of your cargo hold. So in your carrier's cargo hold, you probably can only fit a few capsticks at a time. So you're going to have a bunch in your fleet hangar. If you have capsticks in the fleet hangar and not in the cargo hold, your capacitor booster won't reload, so you have to drag fresh capsticks into your cargo and restock your cargo supply. That way the cap booster can pull sticks. It's a little bit of a micromanagement thing that you have to do, but you have to be aware of it. Otherwise you'll suddenly stop being able to get capsticks into your booster. So whenever you do a reload, you need to make sure you hit fleet hangar and drag up more capsticks. Honestly, as many as you can. On the carriers, since they just have their a T1 cap booster, just to help get back to jump cap, you just use the Tech 1 3200s. They're very cheap. So I would just fill up your fleet hangar with as many as you can. Don't ask me why I have 2 Einharjes in my fleet hangar. They're just there for some reason. I guess also while we're talking about bays, you have the ship maintenance bay. This lets you fit fitted ships into here. It's not too much of a big deal for carriers, but especially on like haul dreads and things where you have like a heavy reliance on cap boosters to run your tank. You can put haulers and stuff in here that are full of capsticks. That way, if you need more, you can drop them and reset your fleet hangar off of the capsticks inside. Not too much of an issue for carriers. You're not that reliant on your cap boosters. Not going to chew through them that quick. But you can also carry like extra dictors and sinos in here, and then if like tackle or sinos die in a fight, they can maybe come back and grab ships out of your fleet hangar. As along with this, if you're not familiar, your ship maintenance bay and your fleet hangar have these locks on them. If they are light green, that means that they are accessible. If they're dark gray, that means that they're not accessible. That just means anybody in your fleet or your corporation will be able to come up, right-click on your ship, and open your fleet hangar and access the things inside of it or the ship maintenance bay. And they'll be able to pull things out of there. So, if you want people to have access, turn that on. If you don't, turn it off. You can kind of see that. I don't know if anybody around me has. Does anybody else have fleet access open? That's it. We're all far enough away from each other. Alrighty. I think that was everything I had for this portion. Oh, timers. Almost forgot. In the top left of your screen, you'll have your jump timers. The red timer, which should be pretty close to running out now, is your basically it prevents you from jumping again. It's the jump reactivation timer. It is more of an orange color. Everybody calls it a red timer. It is what it is. As long as you have this timer, you physically cannot jump to another sino again. That is a hard limit. So you have to wait that timer down before you can jump again. The other timer is your blue timer, jump fatigue timer. This is essentially an exponentially stacking timer on the red timer. So if you have blue timer and you make another jump, your next blue timer will be even longer, and your red timer will be even longer than the previous one. This limits you to making about 3 jumps before you hit the cap, and I think in capitals, the cap is like a 45-minute red timer and like a 4-hour blue timer. Somewhere around there.
30 minute for
30? Oh, it's a 30 for red? Yeah. Okay. It's been a hot minute since I've stacked freaking timer.
Yeah.
Okay.
30 minutes
Since the Hell March.
Gotcha. Okay, 5 hours. There you go. There's some better numbers.
Google is your friend.
Yeah. And so there is a slightly odd mechanic with blue timer, and that is for your blue timer, any time between no blue timer and 10 minutes is the same. So if you only have, say, if for instance I have 52 minutes of blue timer, if I were to jump now, I would get a stacking penalty, and my next timers would be longer. However, if I wait 42 minutes, so my timer is now below 10 minutes, it'll be the same as if I waited 52 minutes for zero timer. Below 10 minutes is the same as having no timer. Just a little neat thing. I don't know why it really does that, but that is how it is. So you can just wait your timers down to 10 minutes and then jump again with no penalty. Alright, carriers, go ahead and dock up in the fort, and then undock again. Carriers, go ahead and align to the O4T gate. Carriers, go ahead and warp and jump O4T.
Hi, I'm back. It's too late to rejoin.
We're coming to you, so you can just chill.
Cool.
So, carriers, when you are warping to a gate with a bunch of other carriers or capitals in general, it is important that you spam the jump command on the gate as you land. So everybody start spamming the jump command. If you do not, and you miss the server tick where you're supposed to jump, you may bump off of other caps and bump yourself out of jump range of the gate, and just be stuck drifting off in the middle of nowhere. So it's very important. Everybody spam your jump command. Hold your clicks into the side. So, if you've never used a prop mod to align your warp, it is a way to shorten the warp time. Your Archon default is a 31-second align time. It's very slow. So what I want everybody to do is you're going to initiate a warp to the fort. I'm going to broadcast as a warp 2. You're going to initiate a warp to the fort, and you're going to cycle your micro warp drive once. Just on and then off. Ignore the second. And you'll see your speed go up, and then kick a big jump up when the prop mod turns off, and you'll just go a little bit more, and then you'll hit your warp speed. Essentially cutting your 30-second align time down to about 15 seconds.
Question, would it make sense to overheat for this one cycle?
Correct, yes. Overheating will give you more velocity, so it'll make you a little bit better, get you a little more speed. Everybody everybody who warped to the fort, you can dock and undock. If you guys warp to the keep, just dock and undock as well. It's fine. And there's the fat chimera without a prop mod, feeling sad.
Got myself a micro jump generator on this one as well, HD. I've never tried it before, just docking to try it.
He's not fat, he's just fluffy.
The FD or the regular MJD?
The fleet one. So we're on the ESS squids, I can boost towards them and take the speed with me.
Mm-hmm.
Quickly, what have I missed so far? Just general moving around HD?
Yeah, just basically whenever jump commands and how capitals work while jumping. I've kind of started with the general, just capital gameplay stuff, and now we're going to go into actual carrier stuff. Alright, all my carriers undocked, yeah. Here we go and take this warp back to the Keepstar. Fortunately, this force alignment is a little bit funky, so we'll get there eventually. Oh, interesting. Plane warp warps to center of the structure, center of the thing. Did not know that. Might have warped some of you into the structure, but it's fine. You'll be alright. Alright, now we're going to talk about fighters and fighter controls. There's many different types of fighters. Generally speaking, for Doctrine stuff, we will be using, for the most part, just one type. And that is light fighters. So you have quite a few different types. There's basically 2 for each race. There are 2 different types. There are the light fighter with the role Space Superiority. These fighters are basically designed to kill other fighters. So you use them predominantly for like killing super fighters and stuff like that, which is where carriers are actually pretty good at countering supers. Not by actually killing the supers, but by killing the fighters, making the supers useless. These are pretty niche use. You won't use them a ton. And so that's the Satire, the Locusts, the Grams, and the Equates.
How are they against like frigates and cruisers?
They are decent. There's technically situations where you'd want to use space superiority versus like an interceptor to some extent, but it's pretty niche from a doctrine perspective.
And they buffed it because they used to be horrendous.
Yeah, the big issue with them is they have this evasive maneuvers as their mobility thing, which does make them pretty quick, but it's not quite as fast as the micro warp drive. It's a 200% bonus versus a 500% bonus. So the issue that the space superiority fighters a lot of times have is just keeping up with things they're trying to kill that are small, but they'll apply better damage if they're in a situation where they can. So the other type of fighter, which is one we use the most, are the attack fighters. This is the Einharji, the Dragonfly, the Furbolg, and the Templar. These guys. So these are your general purpose damaging fighters. They do good damage against a lot of things depending on how you're fit. And so, like I mentioned, they have a micro warp drive and stuff, but we'll get into the details of those in a bit. There are also support fighters. We don't really use these too much, but there are some niche situations where they're good, except for like, well, for 2 of them. The energy unit fighters are trash. Never use them. The web fighters are pretty decent in good situations. The jam fighters are trash. Never use them, and the sirens are warp disruption. So obviously tackle can be good. But basically, the jam fighter, the E-War base fighters are horrendous. The tackle fighters are pretty decent. Their big issue is they're very slow. And the heavy fighters are just for supers, so unless you're getting into super gameplay, you don't really got to worry about it too much. So now we're on dock, we can kind of see this thing. I believe by default, this is what your UI will look like when you first undock a carrier. It's terrible because you can't see the modules for your ship. So if that's what you're looking at right now, down here in the bottom, there's a little detach fighters from HUD button. That'll pop the fighters in their own window and give you your modules back. So if you're seeing my screen looking like this and it doesn't look like yours, that's why. I would highly recommend doing that. From here, you have the Fighter Bay button in the middle. This will let you see what you have in your Fighter Bay and what you have loaded into your launch tubes. Carriers have 3 launch tubes. They can only launch, I believe it's 3 squadrons of lights and up to 1 squadron of support fighters. So those being like your Drombies and your Sirens.
FC.
Yep.
I've started streaming. I don't see what your.
I think per default, if you never changed it, the fighter layout will be toggled under your regular module, so you have to manually drag it, drop it out in order to
it's
appear.
Yeah, click that guy there, I think. No, what's that little that button there?
Yep, that works.
Oh yeah, so default. Oh yeah, so here it is. Yeah, by default is this button, which toggles between your fighters and your modules. So you go to the fighter window, click this guy, and pop it out. That's what it was. But yeah, so in here, basically, if you are carrying multiple types of fighters, you can just click on a tube, drag them down here, and it'll unload the fighters. And then you can select whatever fighters you want, drag them into the tube, and it'll load. And so it has to load 1 fighter at a time when you're loading fighters, so it'll just take a second to get through them all.
So if you're carrying different types of fighters, you cannot or should not load your fighter bay till it's full under the hood, because you will not be able to unload a tube in order to load a different type of fighters.
Yeah, you have a situation where you can have your bay too full to offload a squadron. Now there is a skill. Oh, where is this even at?
Like to hang a mat in the front.
Yeah, it's in drones. Yeah, so under drones, there's a skill, fighter hangar management. This increases your fighter bay. So lets you carry more fighters. Not necessarily have that trained to 5. I believe we like to see 4 for the carriers. If you're getting into supers and stuff again, that's where 5 can be pretty nice, because you want to carry a more mixed set of fighters in supers than you do in regular carriers typically. Keep your fighters in for right now, I guess. Just keep tethered. Actually, I said that we're moving to that point anyways. So one little tip. When you have fighters deployed, the default keys for the fighter abilities are F1, F2, F3, and they will overwrite your hotkeys for your ship modules. So like right now, if I hit F1, it'll activate my newt. If I hit F2, well, it won't let me smart bomb because I'm next to the structure, but yeah. Essentially, it will, like right now when I don't have fighters deployed, it will actually use those modules. However, as soon as I deploy fighters, now I hit F1, now it's trying to activate the NRG autocannon. So, as a general rule of thumb, or like a good practice if you want, you can just keep your F1 through F3 empty in your carrier. That way you're not used to trying to activate modules when you don't have fighters out, and then as soon as you deploy fighters, try to still hit F1 up through F3, and now not be able to use those, and instead be controlling your fighters.
Super important one is the NSA.
Yeah, so
You're already there.
have this NSA somewhere you're not going to hit it by accident. If you don't know what the NSA is, it basically makes you lock things really fast, gives you 500% scan res. However, it makes it so you can't warp. It will lock your ship in place, kind of like a siege.
Hence, don't use them for ratting.
And this says disallow. Okay, so you can't MJD while it's on. That makes sense. I wonder if you can be MJD while it's on.
I can try it.
Well, we might have to science that after.
I think they said yes.
I would assume so because you can MJD,
Everything else,
like yeah, siege dreads and shit. But yeah,
+1.
Got the modules I can try right now, mate.
nah, it's fine. I don't want to mess with that right now. What's like nice for Lupin? Alright, so the other two buttons next to your fighters here, the top one is launch all fighters, the other one is recall all fighters. These by default, I don't think launch all fighters has a bind, but recall is shift R. I'm not going to go into detail on it. There are a lot of fighter hotkeys that you can go through and custom set however you want. I'm going to show you basically how to fly with the default settings in a pretty decent way. If you would like to look into the custom hotkeys and find something you like, you're more than welcome to. So everyone can go ahead and launch their fighters. So you will see once you launch fighters, all of their HP status. These HP bars will go down if they start getting shot. They'll turn yellow, red, then dead for each fighter individually. You have at the bottom your basic attack. This is the standard gun cycling. If you lock something and hit F1, the fighters will just approach an orbit at a default set orbit distance and fire their guns. Don't do that right now, please. Your F2 is your prop mod. So fighter prop mods work differently from like normal prop mods. They will run for a set period of time and then turn off. And then they go on a cooldown before they can be activated again. So you gotta time when you want to use these for important situations, not just necessarily spam it at random. And then finally is your volley, your salvo. This is fighter's big damage. It's high alpha single strike ability. And you can see it has a count at the bottom. The light fighter should say 12. That means you can fire 12 volleys, and then it'll run out of ammo. After running out of ammo, you have to recall the fighters to your hangar. And for instance, if you see here, the little, actually, if everybody just recalls your fighters, on the little image, you'll see a gray bar filling up around it, which is the resupply.
Can you recall single tube?
You can, yeah. If you right-click a fighter, you can give commands to it specifically. If you hit the recall all button, you can bring them all back, though. So basically, the more ammo you have fired from your salvos, the longer that resupply will take. And it can take, like 30 to 30 seconds, like with the full reload or something. I don't remember the exact time, but it's somewhere around there, I think. Alright, everybody can drop their fighters again. So, another thing you might be seeing that might be a bit different to you is you will see this blue highlight around the fighters, and you might even see it around your capacitor. When flying a carrier, you have to select what things you want to give commands to. So right now, since I have the blue highlight on my capacitor and my fighters, if I right-click approach, it's going to approach my fighters and my carrier. Because I'm currently selecting all of these things. Now, you can hold control, click on your capacitor, it will deselect your capacitor. Or select your capacitor if it's deselected already. And now, I only have my fighters controlled. Now I can come in, use my Q command, click a point in space, and now my fighters will move to that point in space. However, my carrier, because I'm not selected, is still approaching this other carrier that I approached. So we can kind of mess around with that. Move your fighters independently from your ship. You can also hold W, this is your orbit key, and you can click on somebody while having your fighters controlled, and now you will give an orbit command to your fighter. But again, I don't have my ship selected, so my ship is going to stay static. you can also see you can Q-click off a few hundred kilometers, give your fighters a move command, and then hit the F2 button, and that'll turn on their micro warp drive. So you can see kind of what that looks like when you all of a sudden MWD, your fighters go really fast. You can see the cycle time going. Then you give them a different command, and then you'll see how much slower they are once their prop mod turns off. This is kind of a secret to flying carriers effectively, is using move commands to move your fighters before you lock a target. Because you can get your fighters onto target faster that way, essentially.
So if you're attacking a structure or something and it's still coming in, I mean, it's timer. You can orbit it.
So everybody,
I like being able to. Go ahead.
no, I was saying, everybody just kind of mess around a little bit, move your fighters around independently of your ship, give your ship one command, give your fighters a different command. It's a little bit counterintuitive for how you play the rest of the game. I guess an easy way to kind of do stuff, if you just left click on one fighter, it will deselect everything else and select just the one fighter. Or if you just click on your capacitor once, it'll deselect all of your fighters and only select your ship. If at any time you hit launch fighters again, it will select all of your fighters. So if you want, you can hold Control, deselect your ship, hit launch all fighters, and then it'll just select all your fighters and deselect your ship. Just kind of useful hotkey uses for controlling of this weird fighter mechanic.
It's also a good idea when you're about to kill something, you can have them running to a different target while still shooting, so they don't immediately stop when the thing dies.
So another cool thing you can do. This is going to be useful for POS bashing in particular. Your fighters, if you show info on them, should say somewhere in here. I don't know if it says an actual orbit distance. I forget. Does it show an actual orbit distance? Yeah. So in the fighter attributes, you see an orbit range. If you click just F1 on an enemy, your fighter will try to orbit at this range, regardless of the rest of the stats of the fighter. However, in things like a POS, you have to shoot a stick inside a 15-kilometer shield. Well, the fighters try to orbit at 7 kilometers, so they will crash into the shield and then turn off because they get stuck inside a hostile POS shield that they can't be in. So what you can do is you can right-click on your orbit key, set a default orbit distance, put it to 20,000 meters for 20 kilometers, and now, if you hold your W key, which is for orbit command, and select somebody, it will now orbit at that distance instead of the normal distance. Now there's a weird thing, every time you hit F1 to fire, it will return to its default position. So we'll demonstrate this later when we're not shooting other carriers. But if you hit F1 on something while orbiting at 20 kilometers, the fighters will start trying to reorbit at 7 kilometers. So you have to hit F1, initiate the attack, then give them an orbit command to reset their orbit to the further distance. And as long as you don't reinitiate the F1, your attack command, they will maintain their orbit. So, again, we will kind of highlight that in a bit. So for now, what I'm going to do is look above the Keepstar. You should see a Raitaru that I forgot to put a core in, but that's fine, we just won't kill it. So for now, I want everybody to issue your fighters a move command and approach that Raitaru. While approaching, cycle your micro warp drive off cooldown. So this is a very real use case that we would use, where
Skyhook raid.
Can you go let Standing Fleet know? They've got enough people down there to deal with it, probably. If not, we can jump carriers on them.
That'd be funny.
So a very real, like, common use case for carriers is you sit on tether on one of your structures while sieging an enemy structure on the same grid, kind of like what we're doing here, where you will sit there, ball up your carriers, send your fighters off to shoot the thing from a distance. And if anybody drops on you, you have your own carrier for defense, and you can like escalate the fight from there. And if things go really bad, you can just abandon all your fighters, lose aggression, and then dock, assuming nobody's pointing you. That's another thing, if you haven't noticed, whenever you launch fighters, you are not tethered. So if you need to tether and you are sitting here without fighters near you, you will have to right click and abandon your squadrons, much like abandoning a drone. Pretty much no difference there. Yeah, if you warp away from your... if you warp away from your fighters, they're fine. So that's kind of a neat thing. You don't have to be on grid with your fighters. They won't really do anything if you're off grid with them. However, you can hit recall fighters at any time. If your fighters are greater than like 300 kilometers from you, they will just warp to you, including off grid. So you can warp to a different, like warp off grid, land on a structure, recall fighters, and your fighters will warp to you, and then pull back into your fighter base.
You can record them inside a POS as well.
Yep.
And if you do right with the carrier, use a POS.
Nalon, you haven't been tethered since you had fighters deployed. Deploying fighters prevents carriers from tethering. So everybody keep approaching your fighters to the Raitaru. Make sure you're using your micro warp drives to move faster.
Yeah, I've just tested FC, it is 300 kilometers.
I do like the way you can look at your own fighters.
Yep.
That's really cool.
Keep your fighters going, guys. I'm pulling mine because I realized I'm dumb and forgot to do something. Just get all your fighters over to the Raitaru. And unfortunately, I need this tune in order to do the thing I forgot to do. Correct, Jade. I believe the distance is 300 kilometers. It's somewhere around there. I've not seen an exact number on it, but just from experience.
I think you're about right, mate.
So you can play around different orbit sets and stuff on the structure.
FC, if I deselect my fighters, does that allow me to pilot my carrier normally?
Correct.
Okie dokie. So the three settings are: with nothing selected, you pilot your own ship. With the fighters selected, you pilot the fighters only. And with both selected, you pilot both.
Yep.
If you end up with an odd squadron wide relay, you've got a set of sirens or whatever electronic warfare fighters, you can deselect one group of fighters as well out of all of them.
Correct.
So you can separate them out. Quite a handy thing.
Also, the fighter MWD cooldown starts when you use the module, not when the activation ends. That's convenient.
Alright, everybody can go ahead and lock up the right target. Just lock it for now. As you can see, you have very far lock range in a carrier. And it breaks the rules of every other ship in the game. For every other ship, if you're unaware, you can only lock out to 300 kilometers. However, carriers and supers just ignore that restriction and can lock out as far as their lock range is.
I think carriers without skills is 2,500 kilometers, with the super carriers 25,000 kilometers. Something ridiculous.
Depends how you fit. I've seen supers lock out to 35,000.
Yeah, my locks out about that as well. I think there's a base though. I think it's well, it's still
Yeah. And why am I not seeing lock range there? Yeah, so Archon by default is about 5,000 kilometers, so you can lock and put fighters on anything on this, any structure on this grid that we're on right now. Alright, so I want everybody to do, set your fighters to an orbit range, default of 20 kilometers, and manually apply that orbit range onto the Raitara. So if you have your fighters out, right click your orbit command, set default 20,000, hit OK. Then while holding W, while having fighters selected, click on the Raitara. And now you should see the blue orbit lines around the structure for everything. Now that your fighters are orbiting at 20 kilometers, go and hit F1 and shoot the Raitara. You will see. You won't see it on my screen. Oh, it did actually still update. You'll see the orbit command, the orbit spheres get pulled in. Now you gave an attack command. So the fighters will immediately try to pull back in. So if you're shooting a POS, for instance, that's bad, right? You don't want to pull your fighters inside the sphere. So you hit that F1, then you immediately hold W, give another orbit command. So everybody can now hold W, give a new orbit command. You'll see your fighters will immediately pull back out to their 20-kilometer orbit and keep firing.
Is there a max range you can have them still do that?
You can set whatever you want, but they'll eventually get out of a range where they just stop doing damage, I'm pretty sure. So now, the other thing you'll see, go ahead and hit F3. This is your volley. When you hit F3, you'll see it'll reset again to their default orbit command. So if you're bashing a POS and you're shooting volleys as well, every time you give a volley command, you'll have to reinitiate your orbit command to keep the fighters back at their 20-kilometer orbit. You also get an idea for kind of what the volley cycle looks like. We're not going to kill the station. I need this for tonight.
I just put the optimal range in the tracking computer from the direction I selected 4 times more damage at 20 kilometers.
Yeah, so that's another thing. You have the tracking computers. These are very similar to tracking computers on other ships, however, just for your fighters. There are optimal range scripts. So if you're bashing a POS, you will likely refit to double tracking computers, and you'll run double optimal range. That way you can keep your fighters out at their further orbit and still apply their damage. So your volleys are probably about off cooldown. You can fire another volley again, see how your orbits change.
Yeah, it's dramatic.
And just kind of get into the habit of fire volley, hold W, orbit. You just kind of have to get into that habit of in and out, keeping at your orbit range.
So we attack the structure. And then hit the orbit command to bring the orbit back out. Does it ever go back in again?
Every time you fire a volley, it will. My fighters are getting destruction now, so I can kind of demonstrate that more appropriately for people who are watching. So you see, I'm going to hit F1, my fighters are going to engage. Orbit's going to be nice and tight, because that's the default. I can give an orbit command, pull them back out to the 20 kilometer mark. Now they're at the 20 kilometer mark. Now I gotta go and fire a volley. Now there is a range set for the volley, so they might have to boat into range.
Yeah, they burn back in again, mate. It's about 15 kilometers.
So now they fired their volley, but now they're coming back into a tight orbit. So now I hit W, give them the big orbit command again. Now they come back out.
What I do is I don't push W, I just push the orbit command up in the selected item window.
Yeah, same thing.
Again.
Yeah,
Too much, so I'm lazy.
Yeah, just depends if you like to use keyboard hotkeys, if you like to click things on the overview, doesn't matter. Lots of different ways to fly carriers. Just like everything in this game, the way you press all your buttons can differ greatly. Alright, anybody confused? Already kind of got a good idea for what's going on here with the fighters? Cool, everybody go ahead and recall your fighters. So now you'll see, since we're at range, your fighters will warp straight back to you. Now, they do warp back to you at kind of a varying ranges. So if you have your micro warp drive off cooldown and you're trying to get your fighters back in quickly, it's pretty good. Just spam the recall button, hit F2, and they'll MWD back to your cargo hold and immediately get scooped up. They're back to your fighter tubes and get scooped up. Sometimes they can drift a little bit if you just hit recall and you don't have a micro warp drive ready to go. That's basically all I had. Does anybody
Be careful about getting people to recall fighters when you're just about to land on a structure.
Yeah, so when you hit the recall button, it will recall the fighters to where you are at that second. So if, say, you are warping, you know how carriers warp, they're very slow coming in out of their warp. So if you're like almost to the structure, hit the recall button, and then drift the last like 50 to 100 kilometers to where you're actually landing, that your fighters will land 100 kilometers behind you.
What happens if I recall them like halfway through my walk so that they're several AU away? Can I then recall them a second time from?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Sometimes if you do that and they land, sometimes they land about 1,000 kilometers off you.
Yeah.
So start slow boating, so you press recall and they should fight you again.
So this sounds very useful for if you need to evac the grid and abandon your fighters. You can just recall them mid-warp and they'll drop mid-warp somewhere.
If you,
yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good.
Your class.
I mean, you probably have more fighter experience than I do, Mandy. So you're free to put some input in here.
Yeah, if you abandon your fighters in the middle of a battle, they will stay on grid and be killed. If you abandon them when you're mid-warp and they come in mid-warp with you while you're warping, and they land somewhere in between, like can happen, and you abandon them, you have to get combat probes out and scan them down. So if you have a panic, just warp, no problem at all, and just recall. And as soon as you're into warp, they will start recalling anyway, and 90% of the time they do land on top of you. Alright.
Yeah, if you are in a panic situation where you're like trying to not get tackled and you're warping to a structure, you don't have aggression but you have fighters out, fucking abandon those fighters. They are not worth your ship.
Yeah, so don't forget, if you've got fighters on grid and you're attacking a structure or something, and you have to do an emergency warp out and you think, oh, I'm safe, I'm sat on another structure. If they've pointed a set of your drones on that other structure where you've left them, you can't tether until they've been abandoned. Alright?
Remember, you can't tether if you're locked to target.
Oh, also, the one thing I forgot to highlight, I'll demonstrate now in the keep, sorry nobody else do this, please, so we don't ping it. When you are shooting citadels and things, alright, when you first initiate your attack, you get your warp disabled penalty, right? We all know this, every time you're bashing, you always get this. Kind of a... Well, and you know the way this works is every time you re-initiate an aggression, you get this penalty again. So as long as the fighters are just cycling their guns, this is eventually going to go away and it will never come back. However, every time you fire your fighter volley, you will get the warp impedance, or the warp disabled again. So, something to keep in mind, whenever you're bashing with these, every time you fire that volley, you will get the warp disabled for 20 seconds. So, if you didn't see that while we were doing that on the Red Haru, just kind of demonstrate that. Sorry, fighters are basically the same as drones, in the sense that Mimitar are the fastest with the lowest damage but the best tracking, and then Galente are the slowest with the best damage and the worst tracking. So, from highest application, lowest damage, best speed, at the bottom it goes Mimitar, then Amarr, then Caldari, then Galente. So, technically speaking, you get slightly more damage out of like Galente and Caldari drones than you will out of Amarr and Mimitar drones. Just raw paper number damage. But the Mimitar and the Amarr will be a little bit faster and will track slightly better. And they all have slight variances on optimal ranges and stuff. That's why we typically, for our carriers, prefer Einharjes and Templars. The idea of the carriers is you get a ball of them and you fight subcaps with them. So we want to have the speed and agility in application of the Amarr and the Mimitar drones. Plus explosive and EM are generally two of the better damage types to be doing to punch into holes on resist of most ships. While on paper, the Galente and the Caldari drones have higher damage numbers. In practice, typically it's harder to actually get that damage to apply to targets, both just raw application and then also just having fighters in the right position at the right times. Any other questions? At this point, I'm basically done with everything I had prepared, so this is general discussion. Anybody have questions on anything cap related, carrier related, whatever?
What are your hotkeys?
Like I said, I use default. I don't have any special hotkeys. So everything you saw that I just talked about today is exactly how I fly my carrier.
One thing I would say is don't fill your carrier bay full to brim. Your fighter base, because it makes it almost impossible to retrofit on the fly.
It depends, right?
I'd say do it with empty tubes. Don't ever load the tubes.
There you go.
Or at
Is
least,
it-
have a tube empty.
It depends. So if you are in a fleet scenario, you're probably going to be like max one fighter.
Sure.
In which case, load the tube, load your bay. Because the idea is you just have new like these are the fighters we want for the fight, and you just need more of them to resupply as they die.
Yeah.
But if you're doing other stuff where you have a mix, then yeah, obviously you need to be aware of that, so you have enough room to dump a squadron into the bay and empty a tube to reload a new squadron.
Question.
Can you swap between fighters to the fleet hangar and back with the fittings of another cap?
I believe so.
Hell yeah.
Was that sorry? My compass talking to me.
Yeah, it's telling me I have to be within 5,000. Yeah, if I approach another Archon, I can probably pull out of my fleet hangar.
Service.
Yeah, just use the fitting service. Somebody said they had a question.
How often are we expected to be using these? Because at the moment I haven't got one, and I'll be buying one. I was just wondering what with the changes and stuff, we're expecting to be using these more.
So the changes to carriers that they gave us was the conduit and the MJDs. Those aren't going to make us more likely to use combat carriers in like scale. Combat carriers are a wartime defensive doctrine, essentially. That's what they're used for. So unless somebody is like truly heavily pushing on us, where we need to fight 150-man fleets on our own, where we're gonna sit 50, 60, 70 carriers on a structure with faxes and just brawl out, like that's where combat carriers are going to be used in scale.
Fax mechanics class win.
So presently, I wouldn't say there's a urgent need for them, unless something changes drastically that we're unaware of, where suddenly fucking NC or somebody tries to start knocking on our door for real. Doesn't seem like that's where the game is currently going. But these are useful tools to have, in case that stuff does happen.
I think Speedy's going to try and use ESS grids for practice as well, possibly.
Yeah, so basically what we are looking at doing, just to kind of encourage people getting carriers, and as we've been kind of experimenting with it, realizing they're pretty freaking good at it, is for anti-small gang, when we got really annoying shit, essentially instead of dropping halls, we might utilize carriers. You can do some silly stuff with carriers.
In that uber home defense situation, would you want dreadalts also in carriers, hypothetically? Obviously situationally dependent, but do you want your holes on kill platoons?
So generally, when we're talking like ideal account setup, we have a main tune, what we refer to as a main tune, that's going to be your subcap tune, and can eventually train into the carrier. And then you have a dreadalt. Because the idea being dreads are an escalating tool, and carrier is a doctrine tool. Yeah, so ideally you would have whatever our primary doctrine is as your main, whether it's a subcap or a carrier at the time. And then if the fight escalates to a dread fight, everybody then has a dread tune that they can commit to the fight as well. Obviously that's pure optimal. If you have a dedicated carrier tune and a dread tune, that's fine. If you only have one cap tune and they're trained in both your carrier and your dread, that's also fine. It's not the end of the world. It's just from a purely optimized min-max position, we're either going to be using subcaps or carriers as our main line, and then supporting with dreads in both cases. Currently, yeah, and then faxes mixed in, however. MJDs are not currently on plan to be put into any sort of doctrine standard. They are a pretty intense train, and they're pretty expensive modules. We'll see exactly where that lands in the future, especially if we actually start utilizing carriers more. Maybe that'll change if we find a better use for them. they're neat tools, but I don't think they are presently really required to do anything. The MJFD is more of an interesting tool that we're playing with as a potential counter for hostile faxes, where you can drop carriers onto a fax and MJD it away from their fleet.
That sounds cool. Fuck.
Yeah, it'll be super neat if we can pull it off at any point. It also lets you fight on hostile fork grids more effectively.